Hello and welcome to Bear Academy. I'm your host, Bear, a UX designer who lives in Auckland, New Zealand. Out of nearly 100 countries, New Zealand has been ranked the best at responding to the COVID-19 outbreak based on the latest report from Lowy Institute, an independent think tank in Australia. During the whole COVID fighting process, the NZ COVID Tracer app took a very important part. The NZ COVID Tracer app was formally launched on 20 May 2020. As of 27 January 2021, there are already 2,496,000 users registered on NZ COVID Tracer app, which equates to 61% of the adult population of New Zealand. Millions of people in this country use the app to scan, record, and save lives on a day-to-day basis. Since Bluetooth launched on 17 December 2020, 859,369 devices have activated this function. The app was developed and delivered by Rush, an Auckland-based digital agency, which only took 6 weeks from concept to launch. That was amazing. As a designer, I think the opportunity of being involved of this project is once or twice in a lifetime. You can actually build something to help saving people's life. What are the stories behind the scene? Who are the people doing the design of the app? In this episode of Bear Academy podcast, I have the pleasure of talking to Stephen Horner, Chief Design Officer at Rush, and Chloe Fong, Lead Product Manager at Rush. If you're keen to know more about the team behind the NZ COVID Tracer app, please stay tuned.
Where do I start? I was born in Hong Kong, moved to the UK when I was 17. I studied industrial design, so that is and decided after my last year and a year of working that I wanted to go into digital. So I started as a product manager, as junior. Not a great place to start because I had senior devs and senior designers all wanting different things, and then a client wanting different things, so that was quite hard. And luckily, because a lot of the stuff with industrial design blends into UX, things like affordances and understanding how things work, the head of UX there took me under her wing, and then I became a UXer. Came to New Zealand 2 years ago as a UXer, and I have transitioned into product management recently, like a year ago.
Right, yeah. And that's quite an interesting career transition, like from industry design to UX and then to product management. So yeah, it feels like sounds to me it's an ideal transition, because that can give you the different experience for different perspective of the product. Yeah. So Stephen, how about you?
Yeah, sure. Where to begin? I guess my first interest in design kind of started in high school. So had a really great teacher. She was sharing all this inspiring stuff like David Carson and interesting typography and things like that. So there's a point where I wasn't too sure whether I was going to get into architecture or graphics, but I ultimately decided to get into graphics. So yeah, the qualification I did, completed that down in Wellington, and then thought naively there'd be jobs designing, band posters and band album covers. Yeah. Turns out that's not as big a market as I first thought. So yeah, a series of fortunate occurrences essentially led me to doing digital design. I guess I really loved all the possibilities of that, the fact that you could have a dialogue with a person who would use this experience.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess I've been quite fortunate that career kind of figured out that was my love quite early on. And that's taken me from Wellington to a stint in Frankfurt. I was there for a year. And then working in the UK for 6.5 years.
Right.
And there really started to mature from someone who really loved the craft of it, creating like a beautiful thing for someone to experience, to thinking about who is the human that is going to use this, what are the jobs that they're trying to get done, and what are the pain points that they feel now. So getting a lot more, I guess, focused on the customer around that time.
Yeah.
And then I guess around, when it must have been 2017, my then wife and I had kind of reached the point where we'd decided that we'd love to come home. I was very excited to ensure that felt like a step forward rather than a step back. And then, through speaking with people and a close colleague and old friend, got talking to Rush. And so I've been at Rush for the past 3 years. It's really been a journey to build a design team that is the equal of the technical talent that was here when I joined. I guess over the past 3 years we've done some pretty interesting and varied and often challenging things.
Yeah, sounds definitely a step forward.
yeah, definitely. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And here we now are.
Right. And can I say that is that in the early stage of your career, it's more related to UI design? It's more like related to graphic and pixel perfection, but then just explore the possibilities and also like how the design can impact a larger scope. Can I say it like that?
Yeah, that's correct. I guess it was a journey of getting more mature in how I viewed it. It was very much at the start, I'm going to create a beautiful object, and sometimes you're almost doing that for your portfolio rather than for the person. And then over time, you kind of start to think about what is the impact that this work is having, getting more focused on the person and the goals of the client as well.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's great. Because that reveals a lot of possible topics to cover, but as mentioned, this chat is more around COVID Tracer app. But before we jump to the product, I found there are a common thing for you guys. You both have the work and live experience in UK. Like you work and live in UK for a while and then move to New Zealand, and also like during this stage, UK is still fighting COVID in a hard way. So, what do you guys think? From personal perspective, what we did and what UK is doing. How do you think? What do you think about in a general way, like what we've got in here in New Zealand as the advantage, but also like some difficulties from those people are fighting in UK. So I'm not sure if I described the question correctly, but it's just a personal opinions based on you guys' experience.
I think in New Zealand we had the privilege of when the outbreak happened in December.
Yeah.
The first traces of it was summer our time, and summer is better because people are outdoors. There's the sun. You're not cooped up inside. It's not cold, and there's no flu, so your immune system is better.
Yeah.
But also the island nation. Well, the UK is also an island nation. But we got to learn from what the best strategies were around the world in order to implement the border closures early and to implement the lockdowns early.
Mm-hmm.
The UK didn't have that still got a lot of family from the UK, and my wife's from the UK. So I think there wasn't that luxury in the UK. So that I think there's like, I assume there's some sort of threshold of community outbreak in which you can't eliminate the virus anymore, and then you have to switch tack to a controlling the spread strategy.
Yeah.
And I'd say we had the privilege of kind of hindsight in New Zealand, and we also had the privilege of getting it a bit later, and nipping it in the bud early to do that. And in the UK, unfortunately, it's a slightly different situation, and I guess the lockdown measures were put in too late, and it had already spread. So, but yeah, that would be my take. There's also a larger population to reach out to control and to understand like what people are doing, and even if you have the latest knowledge, it takes a while for that to filter down to a larger population.
Yeah. There are a lot of differences, and also like it's really hard to control in a really complex environment such as UK with like the border, all the things around Europe. Yeah. What do you got, Stephen, from your perspective?
Yeah, if I think of the single biggest difference in terms of the way that people responded to the pandemic, if we leave aside our obvious geographic advantages, like it's a lot easier to make our border not porous.
Yeah.
I think it was down to the consistency of comms. So the communications here felt very clear, and they were pretty consistent the whole way through. If you recall, it feels like a very long time ago now, but when the UK started, there was originally an intention to go for a herd immunity approach. And then they had to pivot from that when they had more data as to what was happening. But unfortunately, once you've conveyed one thing to people, it's sometimes hard to turn that ship. You have to recall you're trying to influence a large country of people. Yeah. And I've kind of been like stunned and impressed by the degree of compliance here in general. Yeah. And it's really subtle to understand what that is. Whether I think that the communication was definitely part of it, the clarity there, conveying why it was important for people to do certain things. And is there a cultural difference there? I'm not sure. Is there a higher trust in the institution? Chloe, you might be able to describe that a little more. I didn't really interact too much with UK politics when I was there.
I think it also was... there was quite a few things going on in the UK. There was Brexit happening. A new PM was recently... Boris was recently appointed. And there was... so politically it wasn't... There were there's loads of different departments and parties involved. Right. And there's, I guess that would be my take. Just the more people, and that basically, when COVID started, nobody really knew what the best plan was. The more people that get involved, you get more opinions, and there's different strategies, and I think there's also a lot of edge cases, and I see the amount of edge cases that even our QA team comes up with when the app goes out for release. I can't imagine the amount of edge cases in the UK because of the population, because of different environments, so just thinking of all the different scenarios, of all the different interpretations of how you could interpret a policy or a law or something a politician has said, just times it by the population there, you get loads of different interpretations and loads of
Yeah.
different implementations at even different local levels. Different towns might have different thoughts. And I think another key thing is the population density in the UK and urban areas is quite a lot higher. Like if 1 in 5,000 people have, or 1 in 500 people have coronavirus, and you live in central London, you're probably going to come across 500 people in like a 4-hour window, whereas in New Zealand it would be quite hard to do so. Everyone's in their cars, there's not a lot of people walking about, the buses aren't packed. That density really makes that transmission that much higher.
That's a really good point, because the reason I'm asking this question, like what's the difference between here and UK, it's just I'm just kind of like thinking from a product perspective. What if we're doing this in the same project in UK and the result, or in other countries such as maybe US or other more challenging countries? So what will be the results? And it depends on the cultural difference and like population density. Something that we might not able to change, but something could be like if we can think about that and carefully designed for that perspective, maybe it can give a different result. So like currently, I think one thing really surprised me is that how here everyone has the trust for the government, for the government and for the experts. Like when Springfield, when the professionals talked about how we can cope with COVID, or when we see a poster like what's the instruction on that, people will do the right things. But in some other countries, or sometimes maybe it's got slightly different. But that's one of my points. And the other thing, I think what is quite like Stephen mentioned, that people probably is the how we like the consistency of the comms, and also like something related to people. One thing I'm thinking from design perspective is that maybe the user's behavior, or if we use a UX terminology, like the user personas are different from those countries. For example, like here in New Zealand, maybe we have a low tech savvy user. Like they are not as familiar to the apps as other countries, maybe just as an assumption, but they have more trust on the authority or on the professionals. So things like that maybe is the difference, but just as an assumption. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that also puts into some of the product decisions that we have to make. I think it's different. Probably be applying to the UK as well. A lot of the product decisions we have to make is weighing up the benefits of solving a big problem for 1,000 users, or solving a medium problem for 500,000 users. Yeah. And that's sort of a trade-off that we have to make. And figuring out then what is priority. Is it solving a very big problem for like 2,000 users? What you have to make. And I think with the COVID app in general, because it's for such a large user base, it's quite those decisions that you make can really affect lives. And the other thing with government apps is you need to ensure quality. If a person that isn't that tech savvy, or maybe doesn't have the newest phone, like you can't not support them. You have to be able to help them, and it's the government, and it's the responsibility as a state, as a government, as the people making the app, to ensure the safety of New Zealand, regardless of like, can you afford enough data to use it? Can you afford the latest phones? Which is quite different to commercial apps that I've worked on. It's easy for a company to say, we only support this, the latest iPhones, the latest Samsungs, but we won't support like a... So in terms of design, I think we had to think about how we can achieve sort of equity. With Bluetooth exposure, there are rules set by Apple and Google to say what devices they support, which that we're not in control of, but we know that everyone should be able to scan a poster if you have a camera on your phone, essentially. And that we support a large amount of devices for that. So that's some of the kind of considerations coming into the project I didn't really think about, because my background is mainly working with like corporations, and yeah, that's quite a hard challenge that we have lots of debates about. Do we prioritize this epic or that epic, or how does that happen? So yeah, I would say that's a unique challenge to the COVID response apps.
Particularly given the time pressure around them, right? Because to achieve that support, to have all those different platforms and pieces of hardware work on it, that's a trade-off too. So that was definitely challenging.
Was it the major reason that we picked QR code scan as the key feature rather than the Bluetooth feature at the first step?
I would say the Bluetooth feature was not out when we first launched. Was it? Did Apple release by then?
I can't recall the exact timing. I know when development started on that piece of work. There's the Bluetooth effort that had come out of Singapore and the implementation of that.
Yeah.
I believe it happened in Australia as well. So we did some testing with that, but there were some pretty deep concerns we had, because with it not being on the Apple Google standard, where it was kind of built into the operating system, and you had a lot more confidence that would work. Yeah. The approach taken in Singapore really relied, in the case of an Apple phone, the app being kept in the foreground that whole time. And from our experience with Bluetooth protocols in the past, it can be a pretty challenging piece of tech to work with.
Yeah.
So at that stage, it was really of the strategies that were taking place to build Bluetooth without that Google Apple framework.
Right.
Didn't really feel like a viable option.
Yeah. And Steven, do you remember the early discussions around the app? I believe there should be a lot of hot discussions around what's the direction and what's the feasibility and tech dependencies around that. Could you share something around those?
Yeah, I mean, maybe to talk about the design process in general, right?
Yeah.
So we're ultimately trying to align these three things of what does the customer need? In this case, the interesting challenge of the ultimate customer really being the contact tracer, right? So all of this effort is essentially to help everyone in this country help contact tracers work faster, because the faster we can trace contacts, the quicker we can contain any outbreaks, and which means we can all be in the present context that we're in now, where we all get to go about our daily lives. Yep. So it's really understanding how could we equip those who want to help with the tools in order to do so. And that was really about understanding, okay, what is the thing that will help speed up contact tracing most? Then thinking of all those things that are possible, what is the overlap of what is technically possible, and then what is feasible for the business that we're dealing with, what is viable for them to operate as a organization. Yeah.
So can I see it's at first you define the how might we questions around solving the contact tracer as the priority for like the key question for the users, and then work on different ways too.
Yeah, so now that you've jogged my memory a bit, thinking back, we got to like quite a clear point of view where the R value was 2.5, right? So if you think that was the rate at which COVID was starting to spread here, so it was basically for every one case that caught it, 2.5 people. I think it was something like that. So we were quite clear. Okay, the goal of all of this effort is to get the R below 1, because at that point the outbreak will start to die out. So with that, we started to think about what are the key strategies that the contact tracing teams will be working with and the public health response will be working with in order to drive that down. And the advice coming out of the WHO at that time was 2 kind of clear pillars, which was test, and then trace contacts, contact them, and get them to stay home. Yeah. So those were the 2 areas that we started to focus on. And then with the efforts happening with the DHBs, the confidence got high that in terms of the test, they were doing a good job of being able to solve that problem, which got us clear on like what is the role that consumer tech can play. So how can we equip anyone with a smartphone to help contact tracers work faster?
Yeah, that's quite. I think, and also Chloe, you mentioned that because everything need to consider like a large population, a large amount of people with user group. So I guess the accessibility is much larger than commercial projects. Yeah, what's your thought about that?
So I'd say that at the start of the project, when everything was go, the accessibility was actually quite low. Like scanning posters inherently was a barrier for people who have visual impairment, for instance, where if you can't see a poster, you can't scan a poster. And we did hear back from members of the community with that. And when the lockdown sort of relaxed a bit and we had more time, we've been trying to iteratively improve the accessibility within the app, and now with Bluetooth as well, then that's an extra barrier. I think it was Susie that said basically everything within the app, so the poster scanning and also within contact tracing, the keeping distance, wearing a mask, Bluetooth ENF kind of has a Swiss cheese effect, where it's not a one silver bullet solution in which it's the perfect solution for everyone, because that doesn't exist. Yeah. We're looking at stacking different solutions together, so the disadvantages of one solution is covered by another solution that might have other disadvantages, but all of them stacked together becomes the most bulletproof way to stop the spread and to keep New Zealand safe and to help contact tracers trace as many people as possible. Yeah,
that sounds like a cost sorting challenge for different disadvantage, advantage, and how did you guys do the priority for those features or those my guess is that when each feature was proposed, there could be the benefit, but could be like maybe people can't see it, can't see the poster or things like that. So how do you guys prioritize those features, those needs?
So it depends on the goal at the moment, of the moment. So during an outbreak, the goal would be helping contact tracers as soon as possible. Right, with less of an outbreak, we are ensuring that users are keeping a 14-day diary, so that if a contact tracer wishes to contact them, so it really they have a diary to show for. So I guess in different stages of the pandemic experience, I don't really know if you can say that. The goals change, and based on what we're trying to achieve as an ultimate goal, we look at what are the different solutions that could achieve this goal, and so we kind of prioritize based on that. So it might be anything from increasing user, like for example, more engagement might be increasing user motivation. So what solutions can we build towards that? How do we increase the ability for people to scan easily or to easily turn Bluetooth? So I think it's motivation, ability, and how do we remind people at the right times? Like, what are the triggers for people to create that action? Is the current framework I'm thinking about and using at the moment, and using that and try to be as objective as possible. So looking at how many people will this reach? What sort of user groups are we reaching? People who already scan a bit, but we want them to scan more. Are we reaching people who have completely abandoned the app because there's no community outbreak? Are we trying to incentivize them to then open the app again and use it? So we kind of look at the goal and we look at which sort of segments and target groups that we want to go for, and we go down that avenue of prioritization. And also how much effort it would take. So cost is one of the things that we need to think about, like how long will it take to build this feature? Is it then good value for money if we believe and we're quite confident that will reach a lot of people and have a high impact? Then maybe we can put a lot of effort into this. Or if we're not that confident or it doesn't reach that many people or the impact's low, then we can only afford to put a little bit of time and a little bit of the team's time into it. So that's sort of like, it's a bit like juggling. It's not as straightforward as like, let's put together an equation. There's a lot of back and forth, and also there's a lot of opinions. So it's about how to listen to every opinion, listen to the advantages, disadvantages, and have an open discussion about actually what is the best strategy forward.
And that was definitely done in partnership with the client team, like understanding from the MOH team, like the feedback coming back from contact tracers, what the pain points that they were trying to solve for. That really drove quite a lot of the product roadmap to understand, if the goal is to help them do their job faster, what is the most helpful thing that we can do next? So that kind of get us to that quite simple comm structure, right, where it's about going, in order to contact people, it's helpful to have their contact info. So that was a big drive at the early stages. Then the ability to understand where people have been and who they've seen. So the combination of QR code posters and the Bluetooth protocol kind of helps speed up both of those things. So anything that gives contact tracers time back during an outbreak context, that was a question that was like repeatedly asked in order to go, what is the most valuable thing we should do next?
That sounds like you guys have a crystal clear goal for across the team, so everyone can understand like what's the goal for this stage. Because sometimes I feel in other projects, some of my personal experience when different people working a large project or a large product, like people will have too attached to their responsibility and maybe forgot about the whole picture. So sometimes, like for example, like if I'm a designer, probably I'm too attached to my design and really would like to push this as the final version, but because of some tech dependencies or something, like maybe it's not the best for the whole project for the from the larger priority. So but sounds like you guys already got a solution, like always mention the key goal for the project so everyone can understand. I guess there are a lot of workshops and discussion meetings around those.
And I think it's the alignment's strong on the goal, right? But the debate is probably in all the different ways in terms of how. Right, so yes, we want to help contact tracers go faster. Which is the most appropriate thing to do next in order to help them do so? So be able to drive that, I guess, that ambiguity down to really understand which of these things will help. That's often where the work is.
Right.
I think alignment is key, and open conversation is quite key to talk about talk openly. And it's not easy to have a crystal clear goal, and sometimes we don't have a crystal clear goal. It's taken a lot of work, it's taken a lot of conversations, a lot of coaching, a lot of just wrapping your head around the processes on Ministry of Health, and because and then actually coming to an alignment and then speaking, so everyone on the team will know the sort of goal that we're trying to achieve internally. I would do a shout out to our Ministry of Health project team, because they do a lot of aligning their side as well. But it's a massive juggle. Like contact tracers, for instance, want as much data as possible on the people, but there's privacy commissioner, and we need to keep people's privacy, and users want to not have, and especially a government app which has connotations to sort of government tracking and things like that. So privacy is, I guess, something that's super important with everything that we do. So, for example, with the scans, we don't know who scanned in where, which also has design implications, right? So if we don't know where people are scanning in, it's hard to solve problems to find out where people are not scanning and make those improvements. So there's a lot of different trade-offs. There's a lot of different things in the mix, but it's just an open conversation a lot of the time, and just getting that alignment early on what we should do, essentially, to get a win-win scenario for most people.
Yeah, that's quite. I'm just quite curious about exactly the process of work, how you guys work with designers and developers on for example, on launching a new feature or finding the goal, or what in general way you guys working?
Yeah. So maybe I can speak to it in broad terms, and then Chloe can kind of break it down a bit more for you.
Yeah.
So I guess, the practice here, we're really seeking to blend the best of human-centered, lean UX and agile practices.
Yeah.
And that's really in order to determine the right thing to build, and then build that thing right.
Okay.
So it comes back to those three kind of themes that we spoke to as well, around how do we find the intersection of what it is that customers need, what is technically feasible, and then what is viable for the business. So a catchphrase that we use quite a bit is thinking about how do we design for people, design for answers, and design for the outcomes that we want to see from this. So by designing for people, that's really understanding who are we trying to solve for, what are the jobs they're seeking to get done, what are the pain points that they encounter right now. When we design for answers, that's really having that focus around what is the riskiest assumption that we've made, or what is the important question that we should answer now, and then that designing for impact really keeps us focused on, we need to ship things to the customer. So the designer isn't accountable for the perfect sketch file, or the developer isn't accountable for the perfect line of code. Everyone on the team is accountable for creating the outcome that ultimately gets to the customer, right? So just having that focus means the trade-offs that take place, which you always have to do under resource constraints and time constraints, helps people understand how do we get the best outcome as a team, as opposed to the best outcome for the piece of the puzzle that I'm currently working on.
Yeah.
So that's kind of it in general. Maybe Chloe can break it down in a lot more detail.
I think I like to think of it as more as a football team. Your goal is to win that game. It doesn't matter. There are different people. There are strikers, there are defenders, there are goalkeepers, there are midfield, there are wingers. And those are sort of the designers, developers, QA, product, but the goal is always the same. So it's, as a team, we work together rather than a defender passes to a striker, then scores a goal, and then it comes back. So we try to think of it as more on a holistic term. So kind of run a scrummy way. It's of how we do things. We normally get some requirements from the client, understanding like the goals, and if it's not there, we ask why until we get to the goals, and then sort of start talking about implementations. So, and then we have input from technical and design, and also the business context from the client to come up with sort of a very high level, like what's the approach. We have a discussion. So it's more of a team effort. So we have refinements, normally high level to start with, just talk about the context and the goals and different solutions, debate about them, and then design kind of starts to put together wireframes and designs, and then the architecture technically is sort of thought of, and what are the prerequisites, and then we have like a sort of lower level, more granular refinement where we do estimations, where we write the acceptance criteria together, where we look at like edge cases and things like that, and everyone from the team will contribute to that, and then we kind of have like a scopy thing that we bring it into sprint. Sprint's relatively new. We just started this year on that. And then, at the end of, say, a 2-week sprint, because we don't release cadence is actually monthly, but our sprints are shorter, we drop the features into UAT that then gets tested by the client. And then at the end, before release, we have all the release stuff, but also we normally run a pilot with a few hundred internal government people, so they give us some feedback. We look at if there's anything really big that we need to solve, and then once it's out there, we then have support team that feed back into us as these things are not working. Can we either do a hot fix, or can we incorporate it into the next release? So aim for getting it done and getting early feedback rather than getting it perfect and then pushing it out. So we are continuously improving on things that we built at the start, as well as building in new features.
Yeah, that sounds like a great combination of agile and design thinking, like identify the question, the problem in the early stage, some back and forth discussions, and then keep working on specific design and coding, things like that, and then test it with your pilot, and also do the UAT, so user acceptance testing for the audience. Yeah, so I think that's really really interesting to know that, and especially for the question I asked, this one quite interesting about like in the early stage of the app. I read the case study on Rush about on Rush's website about the app. It said it was launched around May 20, so and roughly take around 6 weeks for the design, development, and deliver. So how could you guys do such an app in 6 weeks? Like typically just 3 sprints, right? If we're using Agile to measure the process. So what's the story behind it, like, Stephen?
Yeah. So, I guess to take a direct quote, I guess we also decided to go hard and go early. So, to rewind back a bit, like based on the news we started to hear from overseas, and in our networks, we started doing our homework in this space in late February, early March kind of time. So we kind of started to get an inkling that something was happening, and so okay, this is a trend. This seems like it and if you recall that first period, it kind of didn't quite seem real. Like it had this abstract quality to it, where that's happening overseas, but it isn't going to come here. So we had a couple of brainstorms, and it was almost hard to think it was possible. Right? We were going like, this is a speculative brainstorm. But out of that, we identified several opportunities where we felt consumer tech could play a role. So we've even done some early prototyping around those things, and these were thinking very broadly, right? Like what might be the needs of business, what might be the needs of public health. There was all like, how would you potentially use telehealth to treat patients from home? We'd gone like very broad, just thinking about what all the possibilities were within this space. So that meant when we were ultimately engaged by the MOH, we had a good degree of understanding of that problem space. Mm-hmm. So the homework had been done to kind of get going very quickly. And then once in that execution stage, the emphasis on prioritization, ruthlessly de-scoping, like what is the smallest thing we can do to achieve this story and still get that job done.
Yep.
Having like constant comms back and forth, so we were in daily stand-ups. I guess the design was happening in a highly iterative way, so you'd very quickly move from sketches typically in someone's spare room at home or in their bedroom or in wherever they were, because you have to recall we were all at home at this point, and then that would very quickly move into Figma. Mm-hmm. So Figma was like
sketch.
So we kind of as a studio had started the migration to Figma. We supported both stacks at that time, but kind of the right tool for the right time, like in terms of the productivity gains and the ability for the team to all be within the same workspace to see the current status of any work in progress. That was super powerful. So that would typically be like the first pace that flows would come in, and then everyone could get in there, add their feedback from, so there was a stakeholder feedback coming in, there was the technical team thinking about the edge cases and thinking of maybe a constraint that we hadn't properly solved for. So I think it was just getting those feedback loops really tight. Yeah. Making sure the work was always exposed to the full team. And I guess on the human level, like the whole team, being both, the team we have here at Rush and the team at the MOH, being absolutely driven to get the job done. Like it was whatever it takes. So in a typical maybe like a peacetime context, right, it might have been like a 3-sprint kind of time scale. People did significantly more than that over that time, and like sacrificed quite a lot personally, and we should really thank all their families and their partners for making that possible. Like they're all juggling disrupted schedules, and there's kids in the background, and there's kids on laps, and all of that was kind of happening. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a sense of it.
I can totally imagine like how hard it is, especially during the lockdown. Everyone needs to work from home. But as you mentioned, that Figma probably a game changer for the collaboration of designers and developers, and this could be a good topic to go deeper if we have time, like in later stage. Because I personally feel like Figma is one of the greatest tool that we're using in the digital industry. The other Notion, the Figma, and other tools. But also like you mentioned that during the lockdown, probably everyone worked remotely during that stage. How do you think is it make any difference from work from office, work from home, or work remotely for the project?
So our team still works. It's completely flexible now. So there's always, every meeting, there will be people dialing in. We try to come together every Tuesday just to have one team day where everyone's here. But I think it's a sort of like privilege to be in the industry. Like, this industry is the industry that can go remote like that, and there's precedent for it. There are a lot of companies that work full remote, or like, we just really need a laptop essentially and a chair, and you can do some work. It's so compared to other industries like hospitality, it's very easy, but there are some like challenges where we have to keep the schedule and meetings and have make sure that like it's not that people have time to like breathe and stuff, and to make sure the agendas are right, prepping everything before a meeting, and punctuality. I feel like I'm not a punctual person. After lockdown, I became super punctual. Just because waiting on a call for people just to join is, you just feel like you're wasting your life.
Well, I think we were quite fortunate that our tooling stack was 100% cloud at that point as well. So, and we had I don't know if we had a formalised working from home policy at that point. But we did have people who would work from home and dial in prior, but we were largely, we're probably 90% here prior to COVID. So, all of our, we had the project board being exposed in Jira. We decided to migrate into Figma, which was great for sharing work in progress. We'd got video conferencing happening, so the productivity hit wasn't what we thought it might be. I think was a concern going into it, and I remember that first week of lockdown, I was almost like pleasantly surprised. It's like, oh, everything's just it's just happening.
We're fine.
And I think there's a cost to being in lockdown for a sustained period of time, right? Like the cultural capital that you create from being in the same place and those bonds that you form. I think that was very important, that because the team had the experience of being in a shared space for a long time, it made the collaboration from home easier.
I think it's kind of like one of the silver linings of COVID is it's really accelerate the how we work in especially in New Zealand. Like before that, I'm a work remotely believer, and especially in digital industry, right? So it should be flexible. But before that, not every employers believe that people can work from home or work remotely. But now it's like a common practice for especially in digital industry. Like most of the companies get used to it and find some, and also we have the right tools. Maybe we're still waiting for the best tools for remote workers, because before that I had a discussion with Jeff Goldfield, the author of Lean UX, and he also mentioned that we have some good tools at this stage for collaboration, like Miro, Jira, Figma, or other tools, Slack, but maybe still waiting for something that can really make the experience of work remotely as the same as in person. It could be a great opportunity for some product companies, but this could be something we can talk about that. But really want to know what your personal experience of handle the challenge and stress of this app project, because I just try to imagine if I am the designer for this app, and I might start to think, wow, this could be huge because people are using it on daily basis, and it's about health, about safety, about things. Because if I think in a deeper way, it could be quite overwhelmed. So I just want to know that as you guys actually worked for the app, what you're feeling and what's the experience and how do you cope with I guess there are stress and maybe ups and downs, frustrations or things like that. But yeah, if you can share something related to this, it will be great.
I think what joins it all together is the purpose. So the purpose of sort of giving something back, knowing that actually not even the best world leaders in the world know what's going on, and just taking it with a pinch of salt, like having a shared purpose that if one person can be pre-identified before they spread to another person, then that's something that like money can't buy, stress can't buy. That's something that is worth doing. And I feel like if you have a strong purpose, the tolerance for pain suddenly increases by a lot. So for example, like working long hours, or previously I was on the COVID stuff for the UK, like working reverse hours, just knowing that actually the world is in chaos and we're trying our best, and it's been reflected within our internal team, but also within the client's team. We're all kind of in it together, get stuck in, get something out there to the best of your knowledge, give it a go, and ultimately that kind of helps keep you going, like you're doing something. And it's a rare opportunity and a privilege to be able to do that. You can work for like 30, 40, 50 years in an industry and never be able to touch something that can save a life or help prevent someone. So that's sort of my personal way of putting it.
How about you, Stephen?
I was just thinking like right back to the very start when Pav stood in a room. So Pav's our CEO, and he kind of spoke about this as we've got the opportunity to save our grandmas. So we're making it was a way to make it like very personal, and in 2018 we really took the effort to clarify like what does Rush stand for, and what is our company purpose, and we defined it as we design tech to better serve humankind. So when the pandemic came along, it felt like we have to play a role here. If that's the thing that we believe to be true, we have to find a way to help in this situation. So I think you're right. Like the psychological pressure felt very high. It would be a big impact on a lot of people. You've got these thoughts going through your mind of, like what does it mean for society? What does it mean for your family? What does it mean for your children? So in terms of like the day-to-day experience, I'd say it would be like a roller coaster of feeling, right? So like you go from being incredibly humbled to excited to anxious. It was like this whole spectrum of feeling. But I think the theme that I kind of saw run through everyone was this sense of determination. There was a resolve to go, that's too important a problem for us not to give us absolutely everything that we have. I've actually got a nice quote here from one of the designers on the team. So if you like, I can share that.
That's really great.
So the question you phrased was, how did it feel to design a product that can actually save people's lives? And Marina wrote, looking back, it made me appreciate just how fortunate I am. I'm fortunate for being able to help New Zealand and be able to deliver my best and feel confident I did a good job. It is the best feedback I could ask for, and it is incredibly rewarding. It was also incredibly challenging and incredibly stressful. After all, you want to do your absolute best when you know it could deeply impact such a large amount of people. Fortunately, apps aren't designed in isolation, which is pun intended there, but in a team. And she goes on to say, I was fortunate to be working alongside some of the smartest, most driven and experienced people I've ever met. Without them and their support, it would have been impossible. Having them enabled me to deliver my best. It means when I see people using the NZ COVID Tracer app, I feel very proud and humbled by all of our efforts, which I thought summed it up pretty well for everyone on the team, I think. Yeah,
that's really, because personally as a designer, quite envy the opportunity to have the opportunity of working in this mission, can able to actually save someone's life, or like even just one, if there's one case was changed by the app, it's totally worth it, and it feels like the story you're proud to share with your family, with your grandson in the future. So it's because compared to other commercial projects, it's all about selling, all about revenue, or things like that. So it's not it's still quite good, but it's not as humble or exciting as this one. So I think you guys did a great job on this, and personally I feel people get used to scanning the poster, and also quite already have the habits of using the app. So which is I think what we did much better here in New Zealand. I don't want to ask more questions because I feel that you already prepared some answers. So Stephen and Chloe, do you have anything you want to talk or discuss rather than me asking questions, or anything from you guys?
I think one of the questions that my friends ask me the most, which might be useful for the listeners, is like, how does Bluetooth work, and how do location posters work? Like, what actually happens when I scan a poster?
Yeah.
Because for the majority of people, hopefully you won't get an alert, and you won't actually see the hours and hours of design and development that we've done on the other side of the fence. So essentially how it works is, when you scan a poster, it gets recorded onto your phone the same way you're like writing into a book. And you have that diary in there that everyone can see. If there is an outbreak in a location, the National Contact Tracing System and the contact tracers, if there's a case, they then telephone the person and they write down where they've gone. So it's a manual contact tracing process with the case, and the locations they've been to get sent out as like a broadcast, because the system behind has no idea who scanned where, because the only place where you've scanned is stored is on your phone. So it works a bit like a radio. So you broadcast like, do you have this? There is this location, and without getting too technical, it's you say these are locations and these are the times that they are. So your phone sort of matches it and figures out, do I have this on my records? And if you do, then a notification will come through to tell you that you've been alerted. Bluetooth is slightly different. Bluetooth is more anonymized, so actually contact tracers don't know when you've received a Bluetooth alert. Bluetooth is sort of automatic, and I guess the analogy I would describe this to, I guess my mum, would be like shaking hands. So Bluetooth has the ability to understand like what other Bluetooth devices are around you, which is why it's important to switch it on. Let's say my phone is sort of kind of shaking hands with your phone at the moment. The Bluetooth signal calculates sort of how far you are and how long you were shaking hands with that person, and it sort of records locally just on your phone like what hands it's shaken, and for an added privacy, your hands change over time. So if I become ill, I then upload onto the servers without the contact tracers even knowing, all of my hands in the past 14 days, or all of my hands 14 days from symptom onset date. And the same sort of matching process happens. It gets broadcasted out, and every phone then says, have I shaken this hand? Have I shaken this hand? And there's no identifiable information, because a hand in this analogy is a random string of like just numbers and letters that changes throughout your day. So kind of that's the sort of behind the scenes how it works. And you get a push notification saying please contact the contact tracers so that they can trace you, because you've been in enough of a proximity with someone to actually be at risk of getting it.
Yeah, that's a perfect example, and I think you did a great job on follow the Richard Feynman's principle of explaining something that quite complex to your grandma or to your grandson. Yeah, and everyone who's listening, please turn on the Bluetooth. So that's the takeaway. And Stephen, do you have anything like you really want to share? Something related to the project or design, anything?
I think related to the project, probably just say a plea for everyone out there to if you don't have the app yet, please download it. Hopefully from the conversation here it's helped to shed some light on how it helps contact tracers work faster, and ultimately help us all stay out of lockdown. So yeah, please scan in wherever you go and see a COVID-19 poster, and please turn Bluetooth on. And yeah, always very keen to hear feedback.
Right. And so thank you guys, and thank you for listening. So if you are here in New Zealand, like what we mentioned, please download the app, turn on the Bluetooth, and keep it updated, scan the poster, and be safe, stay healthy, things like that. So really appreciate Chloe and Stephen's time for this. And if you have any feedback around the app or around this experience, feel free to share it, and you can write a review on the App Store or Google Shop. And also probably would be good to check Roche website if you want to know more. That's great. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
To wrap up this episode, I would like to share a quote from Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, Director General of Health. He said, "By signing up to this app, you are helping to keep yourself and family safer and supporting New Zealand to stop the spread of COVID-19. This will ensure we can all return to do the things we enjoy as soon as possible." I want to say thanks to the people who worked hard to make this app available, and I think we should also thank to the people who's using it, who's sharing the feedback to help the team to improve it. It's not a perfect solution for all people's problems, and there's not such a thing exist as a perfect solution. But I'm so impressed to see this great example of how technology and design can actually improve millions of people's lives and save maybe thousands, millions of people's lives. This makes me feel really positive, even with so many uncertainties around us. If you want to hear more similar discussions, please subscribe Bear Academy Podcast. If you like it or have something to say, please review the podcast on iTunes. And I also have a YouTube channel shares videos on tech, design, productivity. You can check and subscribe it for more content. Thanks for listening. And I hope you enjoyed this episode, this interview as I did. I'll see you again in the next one. Cheers. Bye.